SciAnts. We get experimental science. We're curious, non-judgmental.
So anyway, we're going to talk about left-handedness. And it's an unsatisfying answer. Why are some people left-handed? That's the name of this video. It's SciShow. They'll give us a little primer. That's essentially the question that this paper asks also, and it will give you a very unsatisfying answer. So just brace yourselves, chat. Brace yourselves. I pretty much wanted to talk about it because we just don't know. There's this asymmetry that our brain requires. Our big, beautiful, smart human brains are very asymmetrical, and part of how they work depends on this asymmetry, and we just know nothing about it. We just like shrug our shoulders at it. I don't know, but it seems to work, right? Anyway, so looking at left-handedness is interesting for this reason. We don't really understand what determines this asymmetry. Why are some people left-handed? I'm fine with randomness. Nature just wants variation, right? Whatever. But this is weird. Humans, only 10%-ish of humans are going to be naturally born left-handed. 90%. It's wildly skewed towards the right-handed folks. Why is that? Why is that? It's strange. And we don't have an answer. I want an answer. 1 in 10 doesn't seem random, right? Well, that's the thing. Like 50-50 is random. Oh, is it nurture? So Smikes, this is actually taking into account some of the regional differences that they think there is variation based on geography. The theory that I've seen that seems to be supported is that that's mostly socialization and cultural influences, that genetically at a baseline, on average, it's 10% seem to be left-handed. So why are we skewed so far towards right-handed preference? And if it's that important, if it's really that important, then why are we not all right-handed? This is just, it's a mystery. It's a mystery. And like I said, it leads into the bigger question of the asymmetry of our brains, which is very important. We like things compartmentalized and close together, like different regions doing different things, and the regions that are doing similar things are close together. It's part of what makes our brain so freaking powerful and efficient. But we don't really know how that compartmentalization perfectly happens. So studying left-handedness could maybe give us a little window into how this happens, if that makes sense. Yeah, I know the left-handed folks have some unfortunate etymology history as well. Poor left-handers. Got some rude feels from their Latin roots. This is part of the mystery, chat. It's not clear-cut like brown eyes, blue eyes genetics, where we just know there's one gene for it, and we know it's heritable, and depending on what your parents have, we can predict the chances of you having it, and it's all explained by genetics. It's all explained. So this is just odd, right? If you're just out in the general public, you have about a 10% chance of being left-handed. Just, randomly, right? But if both of your parents are left-handed, that seems interesting. Right? You would imagine, okay, well, if genetics are responsible for this and both parents are left-handed, I would predict, very high likelihood of having a child who's also left-handed. I mean, it's an increased chance. It's only 26% chance, though, right? Do you know what the chances are if you have two parents, both with blue eyes? What are the chances your offspring is going to have blue eyes? 100%, okay? That's how we like classic genetics to work. 100%, not this 26% business. It is not perfectly equivalent because we're talking about dominant and recessive eye color as opposed to mystery genetics. But that's kind of my point. It's mystery genetics. We just don't know. Smikes, do righties suck their right thumbs and vice versa? So typically the age at which people are most commonly sucking their thumbs, the right versus left hasn't necessarily been determined, which is a little confusing because there are some people who claim that you can tell on a sonogram or like an ultrasound what the handed preference is going to be based on how the fetus is using or holding its hands. I've seen no evidence to that. From what I've seen is you won't see a strong handed preference until past the age of 1, but possibly 2. Oh, I see. So, like, how they're using their hands when they're younger will affect, like, the causality is switched. It's possible, but generally people who have looked at these things, just mostly they think that the observation is generally that there just isn't a hand preference until they're older. So it's like a 50-50 use. It's like as their brains are developing. Now, is it predetermined in their brain already? I don't know the answer to that. Babies are really weird, and they're undergoing some significant brain remodeling, so it could just be they're working out their coordination. How would genetics explain ambidextrous people? Well, genetics can't explain right-handed people currently. And ambidextrous people are a very small percent of the population. And then on top of it, actually defining ambidextrous people is very challenging because ambidextrous can mean different things. You can be competent with both hands, but still have a handed preference. And people who are naturally left-handed, but were forced to write, through childhood with their right hand, can present as ambidextrous. Like, you can teach yourself in some sense to be ambidextrous. Like, I can write with both of my hands reasonably well. I mean, my handwriting's not great in either direction, but still, right? So ambidextrous is really difficult to study because it's based on self-report or competency. Like, I can tell you that I am right-handed, but I can do certain things equally competently with my left hand. But I'm not ambidextrous. Yeah, so true ambidextrous is really rare. And then it just gets complicated because if you are trying to study it, how are you going? Like, how are you filtering for true ambidextrous? And so actually the study I'm about to tell you guys about, anybody who self-reported as ambidextrous, they threw the data out. They're like, we don't know what to do with this. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want any ambidextrous people in our sample. My aunt was left-handed, but was forced to learn to write with her right, and now she can't write with her left. Yeah, I mean, that's also fair, right? Because part of it is a use issue. If you absolutely never write with your left hand, you never develop the dexterity in the first place. So, what I wanted to do is pull up this paper, because it's not super overwhelming, you guys. Like, it doesn't answer all of the questions, so brace yourselves. So what's really cool about this paper is I learned about a whole new database. Okay, I'm gonna just tell you guys a little bit about this study. So, in order to ask questions that have complex genetics, it really helps if you have a massive number of people who've donated their genetic information to the study. And so it turns out in the UK, there's this massive database where scientists have collected, from willing participants, hundreds of thousands of individuals' information where they fill out these crazy long questionnaires. They have all sorts of physical traits. It's all self-report, but they also reported their handedness, It's not just height and weight and hair color. This is what's amazing. They actually sequenced their genome. So they have hundreds of thousands of sequenced genomes along with all of this information. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound that interesting. You tell us about genome-wide studies all the time. Those aren't actually sequenced genomes, is the dirty little secret. 23andMe doesn't actually sequence your genome. Are you guys shocked? They don't actually sequence your genome. They do this thing called microarrays. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of a cheat sheet. It gives them a rough sense of what's going on in your genome, but they don't actually sequence your genome. Sequencing your genome means they go through and read every single letter of your genome, as opposed to we have a pretty good idea of what's going on in here. Okay, all right. They actually have hundreds of thousands of fully sequenced genomes. So this lets the researchers look at extremely, extremely rare things in the genome, which you would probably miss if you were doing just a microarray, kind of what they do with 23andMe. And a lot of common genome research is done that way because historically it's just been the only affordable way to do this. But there's this really huge database now that researchers have access to. So the scientists in this study that I cannot show you because we don't know where the paper is now. Sleazy, I'm a twin. I'm right-handed and my twin is left-handed. Yes! Okay, so you have an increased chance if you are identical twins. So that means your genes are absolutely perfect to one another. Absolutely identical. And one of you is left-handed. Let's say your identical twin is left-handed. you have like a 20% chance of also being left-handed. It's not 100%. This is ridiculous, right? It's increased. You have an increased chance compared to the general public, but it can't just be genetics, right? Because that doesn't make sense. Why is it that somebody who's genetically identical to you could have a different hand preference? Yes, exome-wide analysis implicates rare protein-altering variant and human-handedness.
That sounds very fancy.
Doesn't
it sounds
it?
like they discovered something.
They didn't.
What?
No, they didn't. But I appreciate it. They kind of go into it this way. They say, listen, you guys, everybody's out there trying to figure out why that 10%, the bulk of that 10%, what is it about their genome that makes them left-handed? And they're like, we don't care. Nobody's been able to answer that question. We're not interested in it. They're like, what we're interested in is the real weirdos. They were looking for super rare mutations in the genome that would make you left-handed. So super rare. So it only explains like 1% of that 10% that's left-handed or less. I think it's more of like a fraction of a percent. Their reasoning for this, you might be thinking like, that's insane. Why would somebody spend that much time and money doing this? Their reasoning for this is maybe they can get some insight into, first of all, the brain symmetry, right? The asymmetry situation that we have going on with our big, beautiful brains. And also they wanted, the genetics plays such a weak role. They wanted to find 1 or 2 gene mutants that had a really strong effect. And maybe that will give insight into this weaker genetic causality that they see.
So like, is that suggesting that there might be a couple of different genes, and if you find something that's really strong,
they thought it would give them a mechanism.
It's easier.
Help them understand a mechanism.
And it's like everyone else might be a couple of other things.
Okay. Yes.
That makes sense.
Right. So that's why they did this.
Title makes it sound like they found something. Implicates, right?
Well, yeah. So they found what they wanted to do is look at these super weird, super rare mutations. And of course they found a super weird, super rare mutation. It just doesn't give us really any insight. I don't know. I kind of want to say no. But this is what they found. Okay, so they're looking for these super weird mutations. Really rare. That are extremely predictive. So if you have this mutation, extremely good chance you're going to be left-handed. Extremely. That's what they were looking for. So it's very uncommon, but they were looking for those 1 or 2 cases that start acting like the blue eye, brown eye business, where it's very predictive. If we know your genetics, we know your eye color. And they want this situation to be, if we know your genetics, we can tell you that you're going to be left-handed if you have this one really odd mutation. That's what they were looking for. And they found something pretty close to that. And they were this handful of mutations in a tubulin gene. All right. What is tubulin?
Yeah.
Why am I talking about TUB4B? That's how it's abbreviated, TUB4B. Okay, so there's this gene. It's a tubulin gene. There's a whole bunch of these things, but tubulin is like the structural support of your cells. Tubulin and actin, but we're not going to pay attention to actin tonight. It's just tubulin right now. It's like the steel struts. Listen, we like to think of cells, when you draw a cell, it's like this little squishy sphere thing. No, there's a lot of structural supports keeping that thing in exactly the right shape that it wants to be. Especially your neurons, you guys. You have these long, thin little axons, you know, spreading the electrical signal, carrying the electrical signal from one part of your brain to the other. That's not just a floppy spaghetti noodle, all right? It has a firm structure, and the reason it has its shape, it holds its shape, is because of these tubulin genes, all right? And so they found this one kind of tubulin, and tubulin is also the cells that can paddle, the little cilia and stuff, flagella, things like that. The little cells that can paddle their way through places, tubulin. So it's cell mobility, and also it's the cell structure. And they found that a couple of rare mutations in these structural genes seem to be leading to a high instance of left-handedness. And so their suggestion is that it's changing how cells are migrating in the brain very early in development. Now, do they go to show this? Not at all. But it's a fun idea. We want to answer the tiniest fraction. Like, they had a scientific reason for it, but I like that they just came into it. Like, we don't want to know why everybody's left-handed. We want to know why these, like, 10 people are left-handed. Like, it was beautiful. I liked it. And they came up with some interesting ideas. Did they demonstrate any of it? No. They did not. Because this is a genome-wide study, and that's how I feel about genome-wide studies. Yeah.
How would you have tested this? Can you even on a person?
Not on a person, no.
So what would you, like, they did this in people, right?
Yeah, because this is just a genome-wide study. I mean, it really depends. You could mess with mice, introduce it in mice. The problem is mice don't have left-handed versus right-handed. I mean, they do, but it's that 50-50 toss-up that we were talking about where it's random chance.
That's what I was going to ask, if it was
But you
random or
could
not.
see if it does mess with their asymmetry, because a lot of animals do have asymmetry in the brain. It just means certain parts of their brain are responsible for processing different things. So that's one way that you could think about doing it. I mean, that's certainly a heavy lift of a study. You could do some stuff in a petri dish, see if you can mess with different signaling molecules. Can you change the way cells in a dish migrate? You can do it with neurons, you can do it with skin cells, like wound healing assays and stuff. I mean, so there's a lot of different ways to test it. They just weren't about to do any of those. So here we go. But I will say, this did make all of the rounds on, like, the popular science stuff. And, I mean, I feel like it was pitched a little bit as we know why people are left-handed. And it's kind of funny because, like, they weren't even trying. If you read the paper, like, in the introduction, they're like, we're not going to answer that question. And also, we don't really care. We just want... There was this narrow question that they were trying to ask. Anyway, but I thought it was an interesting conversation. Just, I think we forget that our brains are complicated and asymmetrical, squishy, mysterious boxes.